Imagine, right? You invite a new friend over, you're chilling in your living room, pouring them a drink, you're laughing over shared stories, and you just feel that rare spark of genuine connection. You know the vibe. You think, okay, I've just expanded my circle with someone wonderful, only to realize, like 2 weeks later, that this person orchestrated the entire relationship, completely faked their personality, and infiltrated your friend group for one singular, terrifying reason just to get your physical home address.
Yeah, it completely shatters the fundamental assumption we all carry when we step out our front doors. We have this assumption that the people we interact with are operating in the same baseline reality that we are. And when that illusion drops, you realize just how incredibly vulnerable our social protocols actually make us.
Right, because we walk around assuming this shared social contract. We assume that if we smile, the other person's smile is genuine. We assume that the dating pool or the people we meet at networking events or even friends of friends at a barbecue are, well, at the very least, who they say they are.
Hmm.
But if you look closely at the underbelly of modern relationships, dating, friendships, I mean, you realize we are navigating an absolute hazard zone. It's like walking through a minefield blindfolded.
It really is. And the mechanisms we historically use to vet people have largely eroded. Think about it. 50 years ago, if you met someone, they were vetted by proximity, right? They went to your church, they worked with your uncle, maybe they lived down your street.
Yeah, there was a built-in community background check. You couldn't just pop up out of nowhere.
Exactly. But today, we are interacting with completely disconnected individuals. We're essentially meeting avatars, these carefully curated personas, and we are letting them into our lives with almost zero verifiable data.
Which is exactly why we are getting into this today. For everyone listening right now, we have pulled together a fascinating stack of case studies from real life. These are viral stories that have been circulating online, documenting everything from like hilarious dating misunderstandings to genuinely terrifying domestic infiltrations.
Yeah.
And we aren't just recounting these stories for the shock value.
No, not at all. We're going to dissect the psychology behind them.
Right. The mission for this deep dive is to extract a very real, very actionable survival guide for navigating modern social and romantic dynamics. Because by the end of this, you're going to have 3 core warnings to avoid absolute disasters, a literal checklist for vetting new friends, and the ultimate strategy for setting boundaries without losing your peace of mind. We're keeping it 100 while breaking down these deep systemic relationship dynamics.
The goal here is to move from a place of assuming goodwill to a place of verifying reality. Because the terrifying part of human behavior is just how thin the line can be between a harmless, anxiety-driven misunderstanding and a masterful, premeditated deception. And if you can't tell the difference, you really can't protect yourself.
Absolutely. So let's explore that line, starting with the anxiety side of the spectrum. Because before you can set boundaries, you have to know who you're letting in. And sometimes our own brains can become our worst enemies when we lack information. There is this story about a woman named Tia. It's late at night, and she is trying to reach her partner, Carlos. She calls his phone, it rings, it goes straight to voicemail. She texts. Nothing. Crickets.
Right, and the unanswered phone call is a profound trigger in the modern era. We have been so conditioned to expect instantaneous access to the people we care about. When that access is denied, it creates an immediate information void. And the human brain, specifically the amygdala, absolutely despises a void.
It really does. It starts spinning.
Exactly. It views uncertainty as a threat. So it begins manufacturing worst-case scenarios to prepare the body for danger.
And Tia's brain certainly manufactured a threat. She doesn't just sit with the discomfort. Her anxiety spirals so rapidly that she decides to launch like a full-on covert operation. She dresses in completely black clothing to blend into the shadows, like she's going on a tactical mission. She drives over to his house, but she strategically parks her car several streets away so we won't recognize it in the driveway. She is literally creeping through his yard in the dead of night, zigzagging between bushes.
Look at the physiological state she is in at this moment, though. The narrative suggests she is experiencing a massive adrenaline dump. Her heart rate is elevated, her breathing is shallow, her pupils are dilated. She is in full fight or flight mode. But the critical detail here is that all of this physiological arousal is being generated by a narrative entirely constructed in her own mind. There is zero empirical evidence of a threat at this point.
None at all.
Yeah.
So she reaches his bedroom window, right? And she peers through the glass. In the dim light, she sees a shape in the bed next to Carlos, a human-sized lump under the blankets. For Tia, this is the confirmation her brain was looking for. The surveillance phase ends and the kinetic phase begins. She lifts the window, climbs into the bedroom, marches right up to the bed and aggressively rips the covers back, fully prepared for a confrontation. She is ready to throw down.
And this is where the brain's confirmation bias violently collides with objective reality.
She rips the covers back, and she is staring at, wait for it, a pile of pillows. Carlos had just creatively arranged a bunch of bundled up pillows because he liked the pressure of sleeping next to them.
Oh, man.
He wakes up, sees his girlfriend standing over him like a ninja who just breached his perimeter, and he is completely unbothered. He just looks at her deadpan and says, "This is why I don't answer the phone."
That is, it is a profoundly funny resolution. But the psychological mechanism here is vital for us to understand. Tia was suffering from a temporary acute paranoia. She was actively hallucinating a threat, literally turning bedding into an antagonist because she bypassed reality to feed her internal fear. Her boundary wasn't violated. Her own anxiety violated her peace. True vetting and true boundary setting requires us to do the exact opposite. We cannot project our internal feels onto a neutral reality.
But the danger really arises when that reality is not neutral, right? What happens when the threat isn't just a projection of your own insecurities? This is where we look at the other side of that very thin line, moving from paranoid misunderstanding to masterful deception. Let's talk about Sabrina and Ellie.
Yes. Sabrina's experience is the terrifying counterweight to Tia's pillow story. It forces us to confront what happens when we completely ignore objective, missing data because we want to believe a pleasant fiction.
Right, so Sabrina goes to a house party, and she strikes up a conversation with this woman named Ellie. By all accounts, the chemistry is instant. Sabrina describes them as being incredibly compatible, cool AF, laughing at the same jokes, matching each other's energy. Over the next 2 weeks, just 14 days, this friendship accelerates at breakneck speed. They are going to the mall, catching movies, grabbing lunch. Ellie rapidly becomes a fixture in Sabrina's friend group. And then Sabrina makes the ultimate gesture of trust. She invites Ellie over to her house to just hang out on the couch, her sanctuary.
And we really need to pause here and examine the pacing of this relationship. Going from complete strangers to inviting someone into your physical sanctuary in 2 weeks is a massive vulnerability. In the psychology of deception, manipulators often accelerate intimacy. They mirror your likes, your energy, and your humor to create a false sense of deep connection. They rush the friendship precisely to bypass your natural critical vetting processes. They want you to feel so bonded so quickly that you feel guilty even questioning them.
And that false intimacy completely blinded Sabrina to the missing data. So the two of them are sitting in Sabrina's living room, chilling, and they decide to connect on social media. Sabrina pulls up Facebook and searches for Ellie's name. Nothing comes up. She tries Instagram. Nothing. Ellie is sitting right there on the couch, tapping on her own phone, saying she is searching for Sabrina, but she can't find her either. Neither one of them exists on the other's device.
That specific moment in the living room is the crux of the entire psychological phenomenon we're talking about today.
But Sabrina assumes it's just an app glitch. She literally shrugs it off, puts her phone down, and they go back to watching TV. She ignores the absolute impossibility of the situation because acknowledging it would create social friction.
Yeah, we call that the suppression of intuition. The human nervous system is incredibly adept at recognizing inconsistencies. When Sabrina couldn't find her on social media, her intuition, driven by the rapid pattern recognition of the amygdala, signaled that something was fundamentally wrong. But the prefrontal cortex, which handles all our social conditioning, stepped in. It told her, hey, don't make this awkward, don't be paranoid, it's probably just a tech issue. We routinely prioritize politeness over our own safety. We would rather risk a dangerous situation than risk making a new friend feel accused.
And Sabrina paid a heavy, heavy psychological price for prioritizing that politeness. About an hour after Ellie leaves her house, Sabrina's phone buzzes. It's a text message from an unregistered number, and the message contains a single chilling sentence. I know where you live now.
Wow. The immediate destruction of the sanctuary. The home is instantly transformed into a compromised environment.
Sabrina panic searches her phone. She starts going through her settings, pulling up her deeply buried blocked contacts list. And there it is. The reason they couldn't find each other on social media wasn't a server error. Sabrina had manually blocked this woman months ago. Ellie was a fabricated name. This woman was actually Sabrina's baby daddy's new girlfriend, an officially recognized op, someone Sabrina had intentionally walled off from her life to maintain her own peace.
When you unpack the level of premeditation required for this, it is deeply unsettling. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment or some heated argument. This woman maintained a fictitious identity, embedded herself in a social circle, faked emotional intimacy, and played a highly disciplined long game for 14 consecutive days. And the sole objective of this psychological operation was to bypass Sabrina's security and obtain her physical home address.
Which is terrifying. So how do we actually prevent an Ellie from sitting on our couch? We clearly cannot rely on vibes alone. Vibes will get you set up. We need a concrete protocol. When we look at Sabrina's failure to spot the deception, we can extract a very specific vetting checklist for you, the listener, to use before bringing anyone new into your personal space.
It all comes down to establishing a baseline of reality. Step one of that checklist is to verify the digital footprint. We exist in a highly connected ecosystem. If you meet someone in a standard social setting, especially someone within a demographic that heavily utilizes technology, and they are a complete digital ghost, that is not a quirky personality trait. It is an anomaly that demands an explanation.
It's the equivalent of meeting someone who claims they don't have a last name. Like, it might be true, but you need to ask why. And that leads directly to step 2 of the checklist. Cross-reference technical issues with your own established boundaries. If you are experiencing a glitch where you cannot connect with someone online, the first place you should check is your own blocked list. Your devices often remember the boundaries you set, even when your conscious memory fails to recognize a face in a new context.
Absolutely. Step 3 is evaluating the pacing. True, sustainable connections require the steady accumulation of trust through observed behavior over time. Beware of the 0 to 60 friendship. If someone is intensely eager to embed themselves into every facet of your life within a matter of days, you must engage your critical thinking. Why the rush? Often it is because maintaining a fabricated persona requires an immense amount of cognitive load. They cannot sustain the mask indefinitely, so they have to achieve their goal, whether it's access, resources, or information, as quickly as possible.
Right. And step 4, perhaps the most critical one, is refusing to mute your own intuition for the sake of social comfort. That fleeting moment of confusion Sabrina felt, that tiny voice that said, "This doesn't make sense, the math ain't mathin'." We have to start respecting that voice more than we respect a stranger's comfort.
Exactly. But it's important to draw the distinction we established earlier. This vetting checklist is not about adopting Tia's paranoia. Tia was looking for flaws in a system that was operating normally. Sabrina was ignoring massive gaps in the data right in front of her. True vetting isn't about treating everyone you meet at a party like a criminal. It's about acknowledging that you are the gatekeeper to your own life, and the gate doesn't open until the credentials are verified.
I love that.
Yeah.
The gate doesn't open until the credentials are verified. But wait, I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Let me use an analogy. Isn't obsessively background checking every new person you meet at a party a bit, I don't know, toxic? Like, comparing this level of deception to a Trojan horse makes sense, but are we supposed to interrogate everyone who gives us a compliment?
That's a fair pushback, but we have to clarify the psychological difference between paranoia and baseline safety verification. Paranoia is fighting pillows. Safety verification is realizing someone's name doesn't match their internet presence. We aren't interrogating people, we are just passively observing the data they present. It's about protecting your emotional health and physical safety, not looking for reasons to reject people.
That is a crucial distinction. We are advocating for hypervigilance. We are advocating for basic situational awareness. Now, let's say someone passes this initial friendship vetting. You verify their footprint, the pacing is normal, the intuition checks out. What happens when the dynamic shifts toward romance? When people are trying to court you, they are inherently putting on a performance, right? How do you separate the smooth talkers, the individuals merely playing a role, from the people who will actually protect your peace when the performance inevitably ends?
This requires a transition from observing passive data like social media profiles to observing active behavior under pressure. When entering new romantic dynamics, we have to recognize that words are the cheapest currency available. Manipulators and even just individuals with low emotional intelligence can easily memorize the scripts we want to hear. The only reliable metric for character is action, specifically action during a moment of inconvenience.
Which brings us to a concept we can call the show-up test. And this is perfectly illustrated by a woman named Tara. Tara is a single mother, and she is casually dating 3 different guys. She is in the early stages, just trying to evaluate who is actually worth investing her time and emotional energy into. Then, the unpredictable reality of life intervenes. Her 3-year-old daughter, Haley, wakes up sick. Tara is tethered to the house. She cannot leave a sick toddler to run errands. So she sends a simple, identical text message to all 3 men. "Can you please grab some children's medicine from the pharmacy for me?"
This scenario is brilliant. because it strips away the performative aspects of dating. It removes the mood lighting, the curated outfits, the rehearsed conversations. It replaces all of that with a mundane, unglamorous demand for utility and empathy. It is an unscripted character test.
And the responses she received are incredibly revealing. Let's look at the first two men, Mike and Will. Their replies were virtually identical. Within minutes, they both texted back asking, "Where's the baby daddy? Why can't he do it?"
When we break down the underlying psychology of those responses, we uncover a classic framework of manipulative and deflective behavior. Mike and Will did not process Tara's text as a request for help from a partner in distress. They processed it as a threat to their own convenience. Their immediate instinct was to interrogate the structural dynamics of her past relationship to find a loophole that absolved them of responsibility.
Exactly. They wanted the privileges associated with dating her, the companionship, the fun outings, the intimacy, but the millisecond a duty was introduced that didn't benefit them, they tried to outsource it.
It reveals a profound lack of emotional intelligence. They viewed the child not as an extension of the woman they were courting, but as an administrative problem belonging to someone else.
But then we have the third man, Tim. Tim represents the healthy standard, the gold standard of the show-up test. Tim doesn't interrogate her. He doesn't ask for a geopolitical breakdown of her co-parenting arrangement. He simply arrives. And he doesn't just arrive with the bare minimum. He brings the requested medicine, but he also brings Pedialyte to ensure the child stays hydrated. He brings fresh fruit, and he brings a small teddy bear for Haley.
Tim's response demonstrates high-level empathetic anticipation. He didn't just fulfill a transaction, he mentally placed himself in Tara's situation, anticipated the secondary needs of a mother caring for a sick child, and acted to alleviate her stress comprehensively. He didn't offer words of sympathy, he offered tangible comfort.
That is the difference between performing the role of a partner and actually executing the duties of one. But we also have to look at the dark side of this equation. Flip the coin. What happens when you build your emotional investment purely on a foundation of words, without ever applying the show-up test? We have a story about a woman named Megan and a man named Odario that perfectly captures the contrast of lies.
This is where we encounter the manipulative tactic commonly referred to as love bombing. It is a strategy designed to overwhelm a target with intense affection, grand promises, and constant communication to create a rapid, unearned sense of intimacy and dependency.
Odario was a master of this tactic. He is relentlessly messaging Megan, blowing up her phone from morning to night. He is swearing up and down that he is completely single, that his previous relationship with a woman named Von Shaw is entirely over. He is painting this beautiful picture of their future together. And Megan, leaning into the words, believes him. She decides to host him for a date at her house. She spends the evening deep cleaning her home, preparing herself, and she lights a specific candle to set a welcoming, romantic vibe. She is investing real physical energy into this connection.
She's converting his cheap words into her own expensive labor.
Exactly. So Odario sends the text every person waiting for a date knows, "I'm outside." Megan is ready to walk to the door, but the instant that text arrives, her phone rings. It's an unregistered number. She answers it, and the voice on the other end belongs to Odario's supposedly ex-girlfriend, Von Shaw. And Von Shaw says, "Why are you calling my man? I'm sitting right next to him in the car."
The audacity is just staggering, but it highlights the sheer logistical collapse of a love bomber's web of lies. To text one woman that you are waiting outside her house while physically sitting shoulder to shoulder with your actual partner requires a level of compartmentalization that is inherently unstable.
Megan's reaction to this moment is what elevates this story from a simple dating disaster to a master-level course in boundary setting.
Yeah.
She doesn't scream into the phone. She doesn't demand to speak to Odario. She doesn't cry. She simply asks Odario a two-word question. Outside where?
It is a phenomenal tactical response. With 2 words, she completely dismantles his constructed reality. She forces him to reconcile his geographical lie with his physical reality.
Odario attempts a weak gaslighting maneuver, claiming his girlfriend is just acting crazy, but Megan shuts it down immediately. She blocks his number, deletes the text thread, and she doesn't go outside. But the most profound part of her reaction is what she does with the environment she prepared. She doesn't angrily blow out the candle she lit for him. She leaves it burning, and she just lets it eventually burn out on its own.
The candle serves as a profound psychological metaphor for emotional regulation. When you are confronted with a manipulator whose entire strategy relies on generating chaotic energy, your instinct is often to match that energy, to fight back, to argue, to demand closure. Megan recognized that engaging with his chaos would only drain her further. By letting the candle burn out on its own, she allowed his deceptive energy to simply fizzle without allowing it to infect her peace.
So the advice for anyone entering new relationships is clear. You cannot build a foundation of emotional health on paragraphs sent through a phone. You build it on the show-up test. Authentic moments of need, a flat tire on the highway, a rough day at the office, a sudden illness. These are the accidental, brilliant filters that reveal character.
Precisely. You are screening for operational reality, not the highlight reel of a curated persona.
Now, I do want to make a cultural connection here for a moment. There is an immense societal pressure, particularly within our communities, for individuals to embody this archetype of the provider or the protector. And we see a lot of people attempting to fake that role. They will drop significant money on a flashy dinner. They will curate an aesthetic of success. They talk endlessly about how they take care of their own. But the second you ask for fundamental, unglamorous empathy, like picking up a bottle of children's medicine on a Tuesday night, that entire facade crumbles. But let me push back on Tara's situation. Isn't it a red flag on Tara's end to ask guys she's just casually dating to run errands for her kid? Doesn't that blur the lines too early?
That is a very common critique, but we must reframe the intent and the context. Tara was not orchestrating an artificial scam to acquire free labor. She was caught in a genuine logistical bind. It wasn't about using people, it was an accidental filter. When you are a single parent integrating someone into your life, you cannot evaluate them solely based on how they operate in a vacuum of a child-free Saturday night date. Tara's text quickly separated those who could adapt to the chaotic reality of a family unit from those who viewed her solely as a compartmentalized source of entertainment.
That reframing makes total sense. You are filtering for real-world integration. But this leads us to a much darker and more critical area of our discussion. We've covered vetting acquaintances and filtering early romantic interests. But what happens when someone successfully passes these initial tests? They show up, but the historical baggage they bring into your life is genuinely hazardous. We have to shift our focus from protecting your emotional peace to protecting your literal physical safety and your long-term psychological sanity. We are entering the danger zones.
When we enter these zones, boundary setting ceases to be about relationship management and becomes entirely about primal survival. The viral cases we analyzed highlight two distinct manifestations of this hazard: the acute threat of immediate physical danger and the chronic, suffocating threat of emotional erosion.
Let's examine the acute threat first. The story of Paul and Chrissy is a stark reminder of how quickly a benign environment can become a mortal threat. Paul has been dating Chrissy for about 2 months. Everything seems normal. They're sitting on her couch, relaxing, when her phone begins to ring relentlessly. It's her ex-boyfriend, Jeremy. Paul, perhaps feeling a misplaced sense of protective duty, decides to answer the phone. He doesn't hear a man screaming in a blind rage. Instead, Jeremy speaks in a cold, measured, aggressively calm voice. He says, "You better ask her what happened to the last guy."
From a behavioral profiling standpoint, that specific auditory cue, the cold, calculated calm in the midst of a confrontation, is often an indicator of genuine, premeditated malice. It is far more dangerous than a hot-headed, impulsive outburst. A screaming person is often just venting emotion. A whispering, calm person is often conveying a formulated plan. Furthermore, Jeremy utilizes a tactic of psychological terror here. He doesn't explicitly threaten Paul. He drops an ambiguous, sinister puzzle into Paul's lap, forcing Paul's imagination to construct the terror.
Paul hangs up the phone, turns to Chrissy, and relays the message. "What happened to the last guy?" he asks. At this point, you'd expect Chrissy to offer context, right? You'd expect her to explain that Jeremy is just prone to hyperbole or to detail exactly what he's talking about. Instead, she completely breaks down. She dissolves into tears and offers a chilling, context-free apology. She simply looks at Paul and says, "I'm so sorry."
An apology devoid of context in a threat scenario implies two terrifying things. First, it implies that whatever Jeremy is threatening is not an empty bluff. It is a credible reality. Second, it implies that Chrissy feels culpable for bringing Paul into the blast radius of this danger without warning him.
Paul's survival instincts immediately override any social protocol. Following the primal survival rule, leave the dropped phone, save your life, he begins frantically packing his belongings to flee the house. And as he is rushing toward the door, he experiences a cinematic realization. He spots an obituary printed out and resting on Chrissy's coffee table. He suddenly recalls a passing conversation where Chrissy casually mentioned that the man she dated prior to Paul had passed away. The abstract threat Jeremy made suddenly materializes into concrete evidence.
The puzzle pieces snap together, escalating the situation from a potential hazard to a confirmed historical pattern of violence.
But the tension ratchets up even further. As Paul is bolting for the exit, Chrissy's young child walks into the living room, looks up at Paul, and asks a question no child should ever ask. Are you scared of dying?
Hearing that specific phrasing from a child is a profound clarion call. Children are sponges. They parrot the most intense emotional frequencies they overhear in their environment. The child's question confirms that the threat of death is a normalized topic of conversation within that household.
The child then nonchalantly delivers the final, terrifying piece of intelligence. My daddy is out of jail and on his way over here. Paul abandons any remaining pretense of politeness. He doesn't say goodbye. He doesn't try to comfort Chrissy. Gets into his car and peels out of the driveway so violently, he later noted he almost gave himself whiplash. And he didn't just leave the neighborhood, he completely relocated his entire life, moving to a different state just to escape the gravitational pull of that danger.
Paul executed the only viable strategy in that scenario. He became his own lifeguard. When you are confronted with credible physical danger, especially danger tethered to someone else's unresolved history, you do not negotiate boundaries. You do not attempt to mediate. You permanently remove your physical presence from the environment.
It is the ultimate boundary of geography. But the second type of danger zone is far more insidious, because it rarely announces itself with an obituary on a coffee table or a threat over the phone. It often presents itself with a smile under the guise of family tradition. We have to talk about the slow, suffocating emotional threat, perfectly exemplified by the story of Anastasia and Dwayne.
The introduction of a romantic partner to an established family system is the ultimate stress test for the viability of a relationship. It reveals whether the partner is capable of individuating from their family of origin to form a new primary unit with you.
Anastasia believed she had found her fairy tale romance in Dwayne. But that harmony was utterly derailed the moment she was introduced to his family ecosystem. The cast of characters in Dwayne's family operates with a level of toxicity that is almost theatrical. First, there is Grandma Pearl. Anastasia performs a basic social courtesy saying hello to a neighbor, and Grandma Pearl, observing from a car, instantly judges her, deciding Anastasia is disrespectful and out of line. Then there is the sister, Vashi. Anastasia and Dwayne share a brief, affectionate kiss in the back seat of a car. Vashi, watching in the rearview mirror, becomes so consumed by a jealous rage that she literally drives the vehicle off the road.
What we are observing is a family system functioning as a highly defended closed loop. They do not view a new partner as a potential addition to the family structure. They view the partner as a hostile invader threatening the established hierarchy and emotional economy of the family.
The central architect of this toxicity, the ultimate villain, is the mother, Langela. Langela orchestrates a continuous campaign of sabotage. She makes constant manufactured demands for Dwayne's time to pull him away from Anastasia. She deliberately and pointedly excludes Anastasia from family gatherings. She utilizes heavy guilt-tripping whenever Dwayne attempts to prioritize his relationship. Langela was not operating as a mother welcoming a future daughter-in-law. She was acting like a jealous, competing partner fighting to retain ownership.
You have perfectly described the clinical pathology of enmeshment. Enmeshment occurs when the emotional boundaries within a family system are so porous and blurred that the individual members in this specific case, the mother and the son, fail to develop separate autonomous identities. Langela's emotional regulation and sense of purpose are entirely dependent on maintaining absolute control over Dwayne. Therefore, Anastasia's presence is perceived as an existential threat to Langela's emotional survival. She attacks Anastasia to preserve the enmeshed bond.
The most heartbreaking element of this story, however, isn't Langela's relentless campaigning. The true tragedy is Dwayne's complete systemic failure. When Anastasia, drowning under the constant weight of his family's coordinated emotional abuse, turned to him for support, Dwayne refused to defend her. He actively chose his toxic family's distorted narrative over his partner's observable pain.
If we draw parallel back to the previous danger zone, Paul acted as his own lifeguard and fled the physical danger. Anastasia was drowning in emotional abuse precisely because the person she trusted to be her lifeguard, Dwayne, refused to be her ally. He watched her drown because it was easier than confronting the structural toxicity of his own family.
We have to address a deeply ingrained cultural value here. In many communities, the concept of familial loyalty is paramount. The mantra is, family is everything. You are taught to respect your elders unconditionally, and you never cross your mother. So how do you advise someone to set a hard boundary against a mother who looks at them and says, I raised you? The guilt associated with that is paralyzing.
The guilt is immense. But navigating it requires a fundamental distinction between healthy familial respect and toxic enmeshment. A healthy family system makes room for a new partner. They expand the circle. An enmeshed family treats a new partner like an invasive species. They demand that the child prove their ultimate loyalty by rejecting the partner. The harsh reality for maintaining personal safety and emotional health is this. If your partner cannot stand shoulder to shoulder with you against their family's toxicity, you do not have a partner. You are simply a collateral guest in their enmeshed trauma.
Wow, a collateral guest in their enmeshed trauma. You cannot love someone out of their foundational family dynamics. So, we have explored the extremes. We've seen the premeditated deception of Ellie, the bad partners, and the toxic families. It is time to extract the 3 definitive, memorable warnings for you to carry with you in real life, utilizing 3 distinct, highly entertaining stories.
These are the actionable protocols you can implement immediately to protect your progress and your peace of mind.
Our first definitive rule is Warning 1, the Roach Rule. This principle is centered entirely on recognizing red flags early. To illustrate this, we look at the story of Jamila, who goes by Millie Rock online. Jamila agrees to a date with a man named Eddie. By all superficial metrics, Eddie is the perfect guy. She goes over to his apartment, and she instinctively runs through a mental checklist. The house smells good, it looks clean, the initial data suggests a stable environment.
It is the illusion of order, the performative cleanliness that often precedes the revelation of deeper chaos.
Jamila realizes she is thirsty and walks into his kitchen to grab a juice cup. She opens a standard kitchen cabinet and she discovers what she vividly describes as a family reunion of roaches. Jamila's recounting of the event is highly comedic. She jokes that the roaches didn't even scatter. She claims they had folding chairs set up, collard greens, and looked as though they held a legally binding lease agreement with the building.
While the imagery is humorous, the underlying behavioral observation is critical. The roaches represent a deeply ingrained environmental tolerance.
Jamila doesn't attempt to clean the cabinet. She immediately initiates an emergency exit protocol. She grabs her purse, she physically shakes out her clothing at the front door to ensure she doesn't accidentally kidnap a roach, and she leaves. The lesson she distills from this experience is Warning 1. If the roaches are comfortable, you won't be.
This is the ultimate metaphor for red flags in any relationship. If a potential partner is comfortable with chaos, filth, or disrespect in their own daily existence, if they have normalized it, they will inevitably expect you to become comfortable with it as well. You cannot clean out someone else's metaphorical cabinet. You must recognize their tolerance for chaos and remove yourself from the environment.
That perfectly transitions us to Warning 2, the peace principle. This rule is about the strategic prioritization of emotional restraint over the desire to be right. We examine the dinner date disaster with Mac and Nikki. They are out at a restaurant. The evening is progressing normally. The waitress is literally in the process of setting plates down on the table. However, Nikki had been the recipient of a rumor, a convoluted fourth-hand piece of gossip that traveled from Bridget to Rachel to Zoe and finally landed with Nikki.
This is the classic sociological game of telephone. Information degrades as it passes through multiple nodes, usually becoming amplified and more inflammatory.
Nikki allows this unverified information to completely dictate her behavior. She power walks into the restaurant and initiates a public spectacle. She begins screaming insults at maximum volume, loudly branding Mac a cheating bastard in front of the entire dining room, while the waitress is trapped in the crossfire.
Nikki's objective in that moment was not conflict resolution. Her objective was public annihilation. She desired an audience to validate her anger and to force Mac into a state of defensive panic.
But Mac's reaction is a masterclass in emotional restraint. He does not yell back. He calmly turns to the waitress and requests to-go boxes for the food. He quietly pays the bill, leaves a generous $50 tip for the waitress who had to endure the awkwardness, and he leaves. He calmly informs Nikki that they will discuss the matter in private. Warning 2 is the peace principle, choosing long-term peace over a short-term public win. Silence is a strategic response, not weakness.
We often conflate silence with submission, but Mac prioritized preserving the dignity of the relationship and his own nervous system over winning a theatrical screaming match.
I have to joke here, though leaving a $50 tip while a woman is actively screaming at you in public is the most incredibly laid-back, unbothered flex of all time. But seriously, isn't Mac basically letting Nikki walk all over him? If someone publicly assassinates your character, doesn't pride dictate that you defend yourself right then and there?
It feels counterintuitive to our pride, But Mac is actually exercising total dominance over the situation. He is executing a tactic we call controlling the venue. Manipulators and highly reactive individuals thrive on public audiences. The audience provides the energy that fuels their outrage. By removing the audience, boxing up the food, and leaving Mac completely disarms her tactic. He isn't acting as a doormat. He is refusing to participate in a game where the rules are rigged against his peace.
Controlling the venue. I love that. Moving on, we arrive at our final rule, warning 3, the accountability line. This principle revolves around the absolute necessity of protecting what you work for. We look at the car tragedy with Kimmy. Kimmy lends her vehicle to her boyfriend so he can commute to his job. While the car is parked at his workplace, his ex-girlfriend shows up and deliberately rams her vehicle into Kimmy's parked car.
This is a clear-cut case of targeted, malicious destruction of property generated by third-party drama that Kimmy has no part in.
The boyfriend calls Kimmy to report the incident. But his proposed solution is telling. He wants to just quietly let his insurance handle the repairs to avoid triggering any further conflict with his ex-girlfriend. But Kimmy draws a hard line. She refuses the insurance route. She demands that the ex-girlfriend be held personally accountable for her violent actions. They break up over this principle, and as a result, the boyfriend ends up losing his job and his girlfriend.
Warning 3 teaches us a difficult truth. A practical solution is not always a principled one. The pragmatic approach would have been to let the insurance company pay. But Kimmy astutely recognized that utilizing the pragmatic approach meant indirectly validating the ex-girlfriend's violent behavior.
She recognized that her boyfriend was asking her to absorb the cost of his chaotic history just to make his life easier.
Exactly. The accountability line dictates that you must never negotiate your core principles just to keep the peace for someone else's messy life.
So to summarize the 3 key warnings. Warning 1 is the Roach Rule, recognize early red flags. Warning 2 is the peace principle, emotional restraint over being right. Warning 3 is the accountability line, protect what you work for. We've established the rules, but enforcing boundaries often comes with a massive cost. What happens when holding your boundary means tearing your own family apart or causing absolute public chaos? We are entering the realm of the ultimate boundaries.
This is the juncture where intellectual theory collides with agonizing reality. We often speak of boundaries as though they are magical shields. In truth, enforcing a boundary is frequently the catalyst for the conflict itself.
Let's examine a scenario that forces us to grapple with immense ethical weight, the pregnancy deception. This is an intense dilemma between a mother and her adult daughter. The daughter had a friends with benefits set up. She secretly decides to stop taking her birth control specifically to get pregnant because she thought the guy was financially stable and would be a good dad, despite him explicitly stating he never wanted kids.
This is a devastating violation of fundamental consent. The daughter utilized premeditated deception to unilaterally alter the entire trajectory of another human being's existence.
The mother discovers the truth behind the conception, and she's forced to make an agonizing decision. She kicks her pregnant daughter out of her home and refuses to support her. The mother articulates an incredibly uncomfortable truth. She says, if a man lies to a woman to force her to become a mother, we call that abuse. Why is it different when the roles are flipped? Furthermore, she threatens to send a recording of the daughter's confession to the man so he can protect himself legally, especially since his income isn't on paper and the child support would legally only be $200 anyway.
The mother is operating from a framework of absolute ethical parity. She refuses to allow her home and her resources to serve as a safe harbor for manipulative behavior.
But I have to bring up the heavy question here. As a parent, your job is to unconditionally love your child, especially when they are vulnerable. Is kicking out your pregnant daughter truly taking a principled stance, or is it just being cruel?
It is arguably the most agonizing relational dilemma a person can face. But we must break down the conflict between unconditional love and enabling abusive behavior. The mother recognized a critical distinction. Her daughter did not make a mistake. She engaged in premeditated, manipulative deception that stripped another human of their consent. To support the daughter would mean validating and subsidizing manipulation. It's the ultimate, painful realization of differentiating between a simple error and premeditated malice.
That is a staggering realization.
Wow.
Subsidizing manipulation. Now let's contrast that heavy ethical family boundary with a boundary that is explosive and physical. We have to discuss Grandma Gertrude's explosive physical boundary at the funeral of a dirty dog. We are at the funeral of Hubert James Calloway Sr., but as the funeral commences, over 30 of his various mistresses arrive at the church.
It is the sudden, catastrophic collapse of a decades-long shared reality. Gertrude is forced to process the complete invalidation of her marriage in front of a congregation.
The scene devolves into absolute chaos. There is a wailing woman by the casket. There is another woman marching down the aisle, dressed as a bride in black. In the back pew, there is a cackling granny with a 40-ounce malt liquor. Gertrude absorbs this chaotic data, takes the mic, and declares herself the wife. And then Gertrude unleashes a literal karate kick on the wailing woman, bulldozes the bride in black, and punches the scripture reader right in the throat.
While we cannot endorse physical violence, Gertrude's actions represent a spectacular reclamation of her environment. She was ambushed by an absurd reality, and she utilized physical force to violently eject the disrespect.
But the ultimate enforcement of her boundary occurs the following day. Mistress Mabel, the next-door neighbor, comes over. For years, Hubert's established cover story for spending time at Mabel's house was that he was doing her a favor by cutting her grass. Mabel casually asks if Hubert is available to cut the grass. Gertrude wordlessly walks into her house, retrieves Hubert's cremation urn, walks to the backyard, and places the urn squarely on the seat of the riding lawnmower. She turns to Mabel and says, "Hubert's here to do the job."
It is a masterstroke of justice. Gertrude weaponized the symbol of his infidelity and combined it with the literal ashes of his existence to enforce an impenetrable boundary.
So we've talked about spotting lies, running from red flags, and setting ironclad boundaries. But to close this deep dive, let's look at what happens when there is no malice, no deception, just pure love and a catastrophic failure of communication. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought experiment. The pink can.
This brings us to a philosophical discussion regarding the boundaries we place around truth itself.
It centers around Lash, her 16-year-old son Xavier, and Grandma Luandra. Lash works double shifts. The family is grieving because Granddad Mitchell recently passed away. Xavier decides to cook a massive, authentic soul food dinner, 24K gold mac and cheese, chicken, yams to comfort his mom and grandmother. And Xavier knows his mother has a special seasoning. He uses the special seasoning from the faded pink can on the windowsill to elevate the entire feast.
He is attempting to utilize culinary tradition to soothe the collective grief of the household.
The dinner is a massive success. Grandma Luandra takes a bite and says, "Mitchell is smiling down. You used his touch. The house is healed." But later, looking at an old Polaroid, Lachey reveals a horrific twist. She casually mentions that she repurposed that pink can a few days ago. She put Granddad Mitchell's cremated ashes in it.
The psychological collision is unimaginable. The physical sensation of being comforted is violently at war with the realization of what they have ingested.
The math immediately clicks in Xavier's head. He realizes he literally seasoned the entire meal with his grandfather. Lachey and Xavier look at each other in absolute horror. They realize what has occurred. But the dilemma is this. Grandma Luandra is sitting right there, completely full, happy, and at peace. Lachey and Xavier choose the noble lie and say nothing. The house is silent, keeping a horrific secret to protect a memory.
They elected to absorb the trauma of the truth so that she would not have to bear the burden of it.
So here is the final thought for you to mull over. If you were the grandmother, would you want the truth? Or is the illusion of a perfect love-filled dinner more valuable than the horrific reality of what was in that pink can? Sometimes the heaviest boundary you carry is the secret you keep to protect someone else's peace. Be careful out there. Vet your circles, and for the love of everything, label your seasoning cans. And the deep dive.